Am I mic'd? Oh, yes, I am mic'd. Okay.
Can you speak louder than the drumming?
Maybe. I haven't ever been told I'm quiet. Well, okay, I have, but usually when I'm like energized, I get louder. So, all right. And when I start actually keyboarding, I'll have to lay down the mic. So that may be. I'll just have to shout at it, you know, on the table. Boom, mic drop. Okay, so welcome to this afternoon session on springing into Kotlin, or as I like to call it, how to make the magic even more magical, because Spring has been accused of having a lot of magic, and you know, why not? We'll roll with it, right? So my name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal technologist and Spring developer advocate with Pivotal Inc. Pivotal are the makers of such fine software such as the Spring Framework, Spring Boot, Redis, RabbitMQ, Greenplum, huge contributor to Apache Tomcat, huge contributor to Cloud Foundry Codebase. Perhaps you've heard of us. We call ourselves a tiny little startup in Silicon Valley. We're not actually that tiny, but we're pretty nimble, so we kind of act like a startup still, you know, for better and worse. But anyway, I blog, not as often as I would like to, but I blog from time to time at thehecklers.com, my personal website, and I tweet all the time at mkheck on Twitter. So who here is on Twitter? Okay, good crowd, yeah. Yeah, not everyone. I mean, well, oh, yeah, right now. Stop it, David. Put down that phone. I live on Twitter. You know, mileage varies. People love it. People hate it. Most people just like it a lot. I kind of live on Twitter from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, and sometimes I have been known to wake up in the middle of the night and tweet. It happens. Probably a sad indication of my life, but it is what it is. So that's the best way to reach me. It really is. If you have a question, comment, feedback, whatever, please tweet me first if you can, if you choose to. If you, for whatever reason, your questions or comments or feedback don't fit into now 280 characters, or you just hate Twitter for whatever reason, I am also available. I'm also a member of the slightly older and more established social network called email. Is anyone on email? A few more, yeah, that's cool. I don't check that quite as diligently, but I do check it from time to time. And like you, I have a half a dozen email addresses. So here are my favorite two, mark@thehecklers.com, which is my personal one, and then mheckler@pivotal.io, which is my company one. But please do reach out to me. The bad news is we have a very short time here today. Certainly not enough time to give full treatment to any topic, but enough time to start a good conversation, right? To maybe examine some basics and kind of start heading down a few paths that then we can continue the conversation later. So that's the good news. We have hopefully an almost unlimited amount of time after the fact. So with that, who am I? Well, I'm the author of several blogs and blog posts. I've co-authored a couple of books. I have another book and some other projects in the pipeline. And I'm a frequent conference speaker wherever they'll invite me. It's always a +2 to be invited back. So this is my first time at DevVox Morocco. Any other first-timers? Yeah, I have to say this is the first time it has worked out where I could come with my schedule, and I'm really excited to be here. It's just crazy impressive. So hopefully they'll invite me back. So if you have anything to do with that, please keep me in mind. But I am a software architect and developer, and as you might guess from the next line, where most of my expertise has been won, is in the field of Java. Wow, they're good and loud. Good and loud, yeah. Next time we should give them brushes. Yes, exactly, yeah, drummers. But I was a couple of years ago recognized as a Java champion for contributions to the greater Java community. So if you had anything to do with that, thank you very much. And I'm a seeker of a better way, as are all of you, or you wouldn't be here. I think we fail to seek out new things and new ways at our peril, and to try new things, not because they're new, not because there is a golden hammer. There is no golden hammer. All right, Sebastian. Next person who comes in has to come up and co-present. So everybody, when anybody comes in after that, turn around and look at them. And, oh, here we go. Here we go. Yeah. Come on. So how am I going to compete with that? Yeah. So I'm going to compete with code. That's how. Yeah. Just beat it. Oh boy. Okay. So anyway, why Kotlin? Well, I like to think that I pursue efficiency and elegance, and sometimes efficiency doesn't necessarily mean elegant. But I think that when you get the right tool or the tool set or language, it can be both. I think Kotlin brings an excellent balance to the equation. So hopefully you'll see that as well and agree. If not, well, we'll talk about that too. So for best results from this talk today, typically the best results would be you'd have some exposure to Kotlin and you'd have some exposure to Spring Boot. Because then we can have a much more productive conversation. But this is an introductory, kind of look, right? So, failing that, maybe you have a good background in Spring Boot. And failing that, we'll just run with it anyway. So who here has done some Kotlin work in the past, or currently? Who here has done some Spring Boot? Oh, wow. OK, so we're good. And for those of you who may not have raised your hand, that's cool too, because I tend to narrate a lot as I code, so that's fine. So what are the goals? Well, first, maybe answer some of the whys. Why would you even mess with, consider Kotlin? Java works, right? It's a proven workhorse. It's been around for a long time. It continues to expand and improve. What do we gain if we decide to maybe examine Kotlin and use Kotlin at least in areas, maybe in all areas? Is it worth it? What are some quick victories that we can expect? What should we start with? And then how do we lay some groundwork for longer term gains? So, first, every time and I tend to do a lot of coding, right? Coding and talking. It kind of combines my two greatest loves. After my wife. This is being recorded, right? Okay, good, yeah. So, every time you do a demo, you have to come up with a problem domain, something that is relevant, something that grabs people, that can be applied to many other problem domains, right? Because nobody has the same exact set of circumstances. So this is really tough for a speaker. It's tough for a coder. It's tough for a speaker who codes and vice versa. So how do you come up with something that has relevance? And I think I found the absolutely perfect problem domain, something that everybody can grab onto and say, this applies, and this is something we need to know going forward. It's ducks. Yeah, I'm seeing the nods. Everybody is completely in agreement. Why ducks? The three of you who didn't nod, you're wondering, why ducks, right? Well, ducks are really important for public health and safety. Any Big Bang Theory fans here? Yeah, so you've seen this. Like Penny almost kills herself because of a lack of adhesive ducts on the bottom of her bathtub. This is important stuff. You need ducts. There's a brand of duct tape. In the US we call it duct tape. Other places it's called gaffer's tape. But duct tape kind of holds the world together, right? And this company actually is branded Duck Inc., I guess. But they produce other stuff, other adhesives, but duct tape is kind of their primary thing. And it's very important because without duct tape, the whole US would fall apart, and probably many other parts of the world. This is important. This is critically important. There are other things, other pieces of our infrastructure that we rely on ducks for, like DuckDuckGo. Who here's a DuckDuckGo user? Yeah, it's a great search engine, right? We need ducks. And then we have the Alpine duck horse. This is going to be big. I think this is going to help solve some of the climate change issues because the Alpine duck horse is very eco-friendly, right? Gets you around. And then of course we have this, and this is I think an indication of just where ducks are going, because ducks are kind of a big deal already, but I get the feeling that in 2018 they're going to be huge, just huge. Okay? So these are important things we're here to discuss. And not one to miss a trend. I want to make sure that we discuss them when we all walk out of here knowledgeable, because ducks, indeed, are the future. So now that everybody is fully understanding the problem domain, let's code. Anyone recognize this guy, by the way? Yeah. Oh, I knew you would. Yep. So as with all live demos, this could end really well, or it could kind of end poorly. We'll find out. So let's.
Just turn it on and off again.
That's right. Yes. If anybody hasn't seen the IT Crowd, it hasn't been produced for 6-8 years, but it's on Netflix and stuff. Well worth watching. So let's code. Let's get this party started. So if you're, again, this is springing into Kotlin, so it's leveraging Spring Boot, Spring Framework. If you're coming from a Spring background, you probably already have some existing Java applications, right? I'm going to assume you have some Java microservices in production. And if you don't, if you have the Java-based monoliths, that's fine too, but just play along. We're going to talk about creating a duck service because, again, ducks are important. And let's say you already have an existing duck service running in Java. Let's whip one up really quickly, and then we'll see where we can start to improve on that by migrating it to Kotlin. Let's see here. Hold on. Maybe I can prop this just so. Can you still hear me? OK. All right. That was a test. If you heard the cough, then it works. So this is the Spring initializer, start.spring.io. We're going to kick this off and just do a Java application to start with, again, because that's where most of the time when we start examining Kotlin, we don't go with a greenfield application. It would be great if we could. And sometimes we get that opportunity. But sometimes we're looking at ways that we can nibble around the edges, that we can improve what we have. So I'm going to start off by creating a Gradle project with Java. I'm going to start off at version 2.0 of boot. 2.0 goes general availability, GA, next month. So we're talking 3-4 weeks. I actually have a code repo that I'll share the link at the end. And the code repo takes you all the way from existing Spring Boot 1.5.7 or 8, I think, all the way through. But in the interest of time, and because you have to start somewhere, we're going to start at 2. And again, because next month it kind of becomes a little bit outdated anyway. So I'm going to create our duck service. And I'm going to use some fairly standard stuff because, again, the assumption is you're bringing forward a microservice you already have built. So I'm going to develop a web API. I'm going to use Mongo for my backend. I'm also going to bring in embedded Mongo because embedded Mongo, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, Flapdoodle. I just like the name. You can run a local Mongo. That's fine. Let's see. So I think that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and generate the project. Hey, we're up and running. All right, so I'm going to save that. Oops. That's my backup here, actually. We can just close that out. And we'll go here and go to our desktop. It works. We are saving. Let's open. And let's open that up. Yeah, sure. OK, so I use IntelliJ. It doesn't matter, but IntelliJ is made by the fine folks at JetBrains, who are also the driving force behind Kotlin. So typically, you see excellent support in IntelliJ, but Kotlin has support in Eclipse as well. And VI, I would recommend you never use Emacs for any reason, but that's OK. So let's go to our main application class. And this is a fairly simple class, to start off with. I'm actually going to go and we'll start building out this project rather quickly so we can get to the fun stuff. So I'm going to create a new Java class. And we always start with our model, right? So, and our model, since this is a duck service, is a duck. Still with me? OK, good. All right, so we're going to use Mongo. So I'm going to annotate this as a document so we can persist it as Mongo. I'm also going to, let's see, create a string ID and a string type. Duck type, right? Right? Good? Yep. OK, so, and then I'm going to create a code, which allows us to kind of take that ID and make it into a different kind of identifier. So here we're going to create a constructor. The only parameter I'm really concerned with, because Spring Boot 2 kind of covers where you don't have to have a no-args constructor built in with Mongo support, but I'm concerned about bringing in a type. And we can create our code based on our type, and the ID will be generated, which, by the way, I probably should annotate that as my ID field. So that's good. I'm also going to create some getters and setters. Getters and setters for all. However, since our code is generated for us, I don't necessarily want this to be exposed, so I can do this, or I can just comment it out or what have you. So that's fine. And then I'm going to do an equals and hash code, because we need this. Let's see, boom, 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 boom. OK, so we're filling out our code quite nicely. And then, of course, we need our toString. So that's good. So now we have our model class. So we have our ducks. We now have at least one duck in a row. So now I'm going to go back over, and we're going to create another class, well, actually an interface, for our duck repository. So this, with Spring Data, if you extend one of the Spring Data defined interfaces, oops, I'm already getting ahead of myself. I'm Kotlinizing my Java. This is the problem when you switch gears back and forth. It tends to become a little more fluid than is handy at times. So I'm going to extend the CRUD repository, which is an interface within Spring Data. So let's extend this, and we'll say it's a repository for objects of type duck, right, with IDs of type string. So that's pretty simple, right? So that's one thing done. So let's go now, and we'll create our duck controller. Because now we need to somehow expose our ducks to the greater world, to our other services who might want to to reference our ducks, to consume our ducks, to, well, that sounded kind of bad, but anyway. So we're going to create, although delicious at times too. So I'm going to create a REST controller, and we're going to start off with a mapping of /ducks. Clever, right? Okay, so let's see. The first thing I'm going to do is inject our duck repository so that we can use that. And then I'm going to define my API. So I'm going to have a get mapping, which will return a public, let's see, an iterable of ducks, right? Docs, no ducks, duck. I should say that sometimes I get to typing rather quickly, so I always count on the front row to catch my typos. So if you weren't prepared for that, you probably shouldn't have sat up front. Sorry, should have mentioned it probably. All right, so I'm going to create a method called getAllDucks. I'm also going to want a method that will allow me to retrieve a particular duck by its ID. Kind of makes sense, right? Public duck, get duck by ID. And we're going to leverage a path variable so we can grab that ID, string ID. Boom. And then finally, I'm going to want to be able to search for ducks and return a particular duck once again. So let's see, get duck. How about we do a search for duck by type? Sure, why not? Once again, oh, actually, I'm going to do a request parameter for this. And we're going to make this not required. So this can be optional, right? So let's see, and we'll make this string type, and let's build our API. So return this duck repository.findAll, piece of cake. For our particular duck, getting it by the ID, return this duck repository.find by ID, and actually, yes, that should be an optional. And then I'm going to return this duck repository something. Well, I kind of forgot something, so I need to have some way of extending this repository, right? Spring Data makes this very easy. I'm just going to return a duck, just one duck. And I'm going to define a method called find by type, passing the type, right? And this is enough for Spring Data to flesh out this based upon the return type, based upon the parameters, to flesh out this method for us. Very nice. So now I can go back here and do a find by type, passing the type. And that works pretty well. But what happens if we don't pass a request parameter? Because remember, I made that optional. And we're always expecting that there. So it would be really probably a good idea if we just made sure that that wasn't equal to null, right? So if it's not equal to null, let's do something. Otherwise, let's do that. Boom, so that's pretty good. So now let's just return, let's say the first one. Whoops, let's see, find all dot, let's grab an iterator dot next. Okay. So if we provide no search parameter, no type parameter, we'll just grab our first duck, the first duck in the row. Otherwise, we'll use that search parameter to return a specific duck. So let's run it and make sure that the front row hasn't let me down here. Oh, I did forget one thing, actually. Front row. Okay, so remember I mentioned that that Flapdoodle, the embedded Mongo database, was in there. But it assumes that you want to run this just for tests. I like to actually run it when we're running our application. So I'm going to restart that. And look at that. Oh, we forgot one other thing, right? I mean, this all works. Obviously, you see it started up and running, but I'm a kind of a visual person, so I like to see what's going on. So I like sample data. So let's create some sample data. Now let's go to our main application, and let's see. Boom. I'm going to create a bean, which implements a command line runner interface. And in Spring Boot, the command line runner interface is a functional interface with a single abstract method. What can you replace that with in Java 8? A Lambda, right? So we're going to replace that with a Lambda. I'll call this demo data, and we're going to inject our duck repository here. And here's our Lambda. Return args, boom, boom. Okay, so let's create some ducks. So I'm going to create a stream of duck names. We'll start with mallard. Mallard is the most popular or common duck in the world, right? I know there's one. I always love names like this. Northern shoveler. Who comes up with this stuff, right? So there's a northern shoveler duck. Does anyone know a different kind of duck? What? Oh, Donald Duck. Okay, we'll go with that. Okay, so we're taking it in this direction. All right, so let's do rubber duck, right? Rubber duck, duck. Okay. Let's see, what else?
Howard.
Howard the duck. Okay, yes. Howard the duck. Oh, yes, Daffy. Daffy duck. Okay, so this is pretty good, right? Anybody else want to throw one in? We good? What? Duct tape. Okay, a bit unorthodox, but we've already talked about duct tape, so it qualifies. Okay. All right, well, I'll stop here, but the code is in a repo, and I just take pull requests, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so we have a stream of duck names now. So we're going to map this. So we'll take our duck type. This is our duck type. No pun intended. And I'm going to create a new duck, based on that duck type, right? Whoops, boom, boom. And then I'm going to do a for each, and let's see, we'll take that duck that's coming in, and we will take our duck repository, and we'll do a save of our duck. And then, because again, I'm a visual person, I like to see what's going on, I'm just going to do a duck repository.findAll.forEach, and we'll just throw these out so we can take a look at them. System.out, print line. Okay, now we can clean this up just a little bit. We can replace our lambdas with a method reference and all that. Absolutely not necessary, but it's kind of nice since we're in the neighborhood anyway. So let's run it. Oh, yes.
For dependency injection.
Oh, with a single constructor, you don't have to do the add auto wired since like 4.3 of Spring Framework. So very nice. So we see here. Yes.
We should clear the database before.
Oh, you know what? We really should. Actually, this is embedded though, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. So we're cool. But yeah, that's a good point. If we were running against an actual this is one of the nice things about the embedded because you don't have to worry about it. So here we have our ducks. So we've got some nice looking ducks out of here, right? So this is our Java application. Just a few minutes, we've cranked it up. Now let's get to the real stuff, which is the Kotlin. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is, because it's actually as quickly as I do type, there's a lot of typing, and I just like to make sure I get everything right. So I'm going to just copy in a build.gradle file, which actually has all of my other goodies in there. Let's see, backup, files, build, boom. Okay, so now we can take a look at our build.gradle file and see that we have some differences now. And again, this is fairly simple to do, but in the interest of time and my poor fingers, I'm going to do this. We start with our Kotlin version. We bring in a few different plugins. So we have our Kotlin Gradle plugin, so Gradle knows what to do with it. All open allows you to designate which annotated components, or which components, which classes are open for modification. And then, of course, we have our Kotlin Spring plugin, which additionally helps out with that a bit. We have a few different options that we set. Kotlin defaults to a JVM target of 1.6 for Android. We don't care about that. We're running with JVM 8, with Java 8, so we're going to go ahead and target that. The compiler args allow us to have a little bit better type safety, null safety. With Kotlin, they support many different options for that. JSR 305 is a popular option. IntelliJ supports it. Kotlin supports it. Spring Framework 5 actually uses JSR 305 annotations to annotate that it's a not null API, and then to specify what parameters, what return types, what variables are nullable. So it makes everything much more type safe. From a Kotlin perspective, so we tend to add those in just for additional type safety. And then, of course, with your dependencies here, we have the standard lib for JRE 8 for Kotlin, as well as Kotlin Reflect. So that gives us kind of our starting point. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the project, which does one really nice thing for me visibly, which is it gives me my Kotlin directory, my Kotlin package here. So how do we start? Kotlin tends to have different ways of doing pretty much anything, which is kind of nice. It gives you a little bit of flexibility, and it gives you a little bit of ways to choose ways that you like the way it expresses its your outcomes. But I will typically start with my domain, my model. So I'm going to start with my model class, and I'm going to hand change that. So give you an idea of the onerous task that becomes when you do it all by hand. I'm kind of joking. I'm going to rename my duck.java class to a duck.kt class. Okay, so this is enough for IntelliJ to say, hey, this is Kotlin. And it's unhappy because it's really not. I mean, it's still Java. But it's a starting point, right? So I like to just go ahead and drag this down. This is actually not absolutely necessary, but I think it, oh, actually before I do that, I want to create a package. Because I always create, oh, silly me. I always create a package which mirrors my Java package structure. So com.example.duck service. And then I'm going to drag my duck down to here. IntelliJ handles the move for you. And now it's just up to us to make this into a real Kotlin class versus Java. So there are several points that I kind of want to hit along the way. The first thing is that Kotlin has, by default, public visibility. So you can do that. So that's a little less code. That's kind of nice. It also tends to treat constructors a little bit differently. With Java, you typically have a lot of constructors. With Kotlin, typically you don't need a lot of constructors. You may only need one. And when you express that one, it becomes very simple to do because you can do something like that and start listing your constructor parameters right after your class name. So I'm actually going to bring that up. And this is another thing. Kotlin doesn't require semicolons. So we can get rid of all these, which is kind of nice. I'm going to make this, or indicate that this is a string variable. Actually, I should say a string value, because Kotlin has two different expressions for, I guess, broadly termed variables. You have a variable which is assignable multiple times. You have values which are like the Java final variables, which you assign them once and only once, well, up to once, I should say, I guess. We're going to make this a val type. So we're going to create an ID field. We're going to indicate it's a string. We're still using the same annotation for string data. And then I'm going to bring up my next thing, which is a val, which is the type field. We'll make this a string as well. And we'll stop there. Because remember, our code is a derived value. So let me just kind of, I'm going to, oh, did I not? I didn't even put that in the Java. Oh, I skipped that. Well, trust me, it's a derived type, a derived field. So we will come back to that then. Boy, that just takes, that hurts. Okay, so this, when you have a class in Kotlin that typically is used to store and retrieve data, it's what's typically known as a data class. So if we annotate, or if we make this a data class, we can get rid of a lot of things. One, we already have, let's see, well, we have our getters, we have our setters, so we can get rid of all of this. So that's kind of nice, right? And this leaves us with our equals, hash code, and toString, which a data class also provides. Doesn't mean you can't overwrite it. For instance, if we decide to override something, like our, well, let's, yeah, let me go ahead and do this because, oh, I should point out this as well. If this is all there is to your class, your data class, you're done. You don't have to do this. You're just done with that. I'm actually going to go ahead and do a couple things. So we have to go ahead and provide our curly braces. But here I'm going to create a function. In Kotlin, everything is fun, right? So these are your methods. This is a function. So I'm going to do a toString function, and I'm going to override. Yeah, let's see, override. Well, you're going to make me do this the hard way. Okay, so, oh, this is why. That is why. Okay, so, fun, override, there we go. So, let's go back to here, and let's see what we can do here. So with Kotlin, it's also much simpler for your return types, or I should say your function, your method definition. Because if you have a single expression, you don't have to do the curly braces like this and do a return statement. All you typically have to do is an assignment, right? So let's just assign this, and I'll get rid of this, and then let's clean this up just a little bit. Kotlin also gives you expression language, so that then you can, let's just bring this up here, and let's add this. So we have a $ID, which will reference our ID, and bring this up, and same thing with type. We have a $type, and same thing with our code. $code, and there we go. So that actually gives me a chance to show you a couple different things. Oh, I don't have code in there yet, so I guess we probably should fix that one next, shouldn't we? We want a derived value for a member variable here. So first we say that this is a val. We say val code, and then, sorry I didn't do this in Java, but what we want to do is take our type, and let's see, let's replace our spaces with a dash, right? And then let's do a 2 lowercase, and that gets us our code. Almost added the semicolon. So now we have something we can work with, right? This is our derived value. And let's see, is there anything else? Oh, I get a chance to show you one thing here, which is type inference. If we don't want to infer the particular type, actually we can specify it directly. So string, right? But there's no need for that when Kotlin can infer the type, and as JetBrains, as IntelliJ actually shows you here. So that's pretty much it. We've converted our model to Kotlin, but we do have to do one other thing, just as a little bit of a cleanup here, because, oh, actually I need to do one more thing before that. Because this, with Spring Data, we want our Mongo repository to create our ID for us, to generate that ID. So we don't want to expect that we're going to provide one when we create a duck in our code. So this is the way you indicate that a variable or a value can be nullable. It has a question mark. It just means that, do you have a value, do you not? No idea. I'm going to assign it a default value of null. And then in this case, we're going to assign a default value for our type of some odd duck. How's that? And this will always have a value. It's not nullable. Even if we provide no value, it will give the value some odd duck. So let's go back here, which means that here we need to, as a nod, because we're still in Java at this point, so we need to kind of make some accommodations there. So we're going to take our duck type. Oops. We're going to take our duck type, and we'll do a new duck, and I'm going to pass null for my first parameter, and then take that type and supply that for my duck type. So we should be up and running now. So we're still running a mostly Java app, but we've converted our model to Kotlin. So that seems to work. Proof's in the pudding, though. So let's hit those endpoints, and we'll see what we have. So we're going to query our ducks. Bam! So we have our ducks. The ducks look good. So let's grab Howard here. And let's see if we can hit our ID endpoint, and Howard works. So let's do a search. And remember, we have a request param that we can indicate, let's say for Howard the duck. And then I'm going to bring that in. And that all works, right? But what happens if we don't provide a search parameter, a request parameter? And again, we accommodated that as well in our code. So that's kind of nice. So we've got everything working as we expected with a Kotlin model. How are we doing on time? Good shape. So let's go ahead and take this to the next step. Let's start converting the rest of our application, the rest of our duck service, to a fully Kotlin service, and see how far we can get with this. What I typically like to do next is my repository. It's very simple. And this gives me a chance to show you this. IntelliJ gives you a convert Java file to Kotlin option, which is kind of slick. And for very simple classes and interfaces, it works a treat. So you saw how difficult that was, right? I mean, that was like 2 clicks. Yeah, 3 if you count the prompt. So that's 3 clicks, but it's still pretty doable, right? And you notice it already converted it to a .kt file. So I'm going to take that duck repository and again, drag it down, because I'm kind of OCD that way. And that should work. We'll assume it will, so we can go on and charge through, right? So let's go to our duck controller. This is a little more complex. What do you think? Can we do this? Let's convert the Java file to Kotlin. It says, hey, some code may require corrections after performing it. Sure, let's go ahead and do it anyway. So this is still pretty respectable, right? I mean, this does okay. I'm going to go ahead and drag it down, and then we'll see what we have to deal with here. So this is our duck controller, and this does a few different little things. I do want to start before I kind of dive into the code. If you notice this, this indicates that the value, the member variable you're creating here is not exposed outside of the object itself. If you leave this off, it is, but we already know our duck repository is visible throughout our application, throughout our duck service, so it seems a little silly to expose that by way of our duck controller as well, so we make it private. So it's only used and usable within our duck controller. All good so far. I'm going to skip this one and come back to it here in a moment, but you notice that the converter actually made this into a member variable. It's a matter of preference, by and large, when you're talking about something like this. I like to keep everything consistent and make them all fun. Fun's better, right? But we'll come back. So here's our get mapping for our ID endpoint. And we see it's a fun get duck by ID. Everything seems to have converted pretty well. But there are some things that we can do to clean this up a little bit. One, it's one single expression. So we already know that we don't have to do this. We can just clean that up like that. We also see that we've specified our return type. We can actually have that inferred. So we see that the inference is handled very nicely. So that kind of cleans that code up quite a bit. We can do the same thing down here. I'm going to assign this. And the nice thing, another nice thing about Kotlin, is that if and else and many other things are not statements. In Java, they're statements. They return a value. They're reserved words. In Kotlin, they're expressions. So they return a value so they can be used to build very fluid and fluent conversations in your code, if you will. So we're assigning if type equals null. And of course, we can get rid of this. I'll just leave that in. We also don't need any of this stuff. So we can get rid of this. And let's see, where does that put us? That cleans that up. So we'll go ahead and format this a little bit better. And that's a little bit nicer. We can also get rid of our explicit type.